that's probably one of the scenes that had me take a long time before I was courageous enough to write about it, because I didn't know if I was going to find the words to talk about the tear gas smell, because I also smelt it, watching these men sing before they were killed. They actually sang church hymns before they were killed. And hearing these other people sharpening their machetes on the tarmac that we're going to use to kill them.
Hello, my name is Donald, and welcome to the #1 media company, WorldView. At WorldView, we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. Today, we're chatting with a very special guest that was born in a beautiful country, Rwanda. Pie-Pacifique Kabalira-Uwase managed to survive the Rwanda Genocide and made it from being a car guard in South Africa to enrolling at university and receiving the Mandela-Rhodes Scholarship. He explains the story in the powerful book Witnessing, from the Rwandan tragedy to healing in South Africa, which I would definitely recommend to anyone. Pie-Pacifique, it's so great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Pie-Pacifique, many of our viewers, both local and international, would have no idea what it is like growing up in Rwanda, let alone how Rwanda looks. So can you paint us an image? What is Rwanda like?
Well, Rwanda is obviously, many people think of it as a small country, but when you are in it, the idea of smallness is certainly not there. I remember when I was growing up, there is a province used to be called Cyangugu. It's like on the southwest of Rwanda, and that was the furthest province or furthest city from Kigali. But when somebody said Cyangugu, that meant they are going so far, far away. It just sounded like so far away to anybody's mind, right? And so to the point where if somebody was going far, we said they're going as far as if they were going to Cyangugu, right? So when I grew up, the Rwanda being small actually wasn't a concept. It was a country. And actually, contrary to its current size, the name Rwanda actually has its roots in expanding. Rwanda is to expand, because that's how it started, as a small little kingdom, and then it expanded, and actually the current size as it is. But growing up there, it's green. The city is, you walk away, you are in the rural area, right? So now that I live in mega cities, I know how privileged we were, that just walking away from a few kilometers away, you were in a rural setting, and we could get fresh food, organic food, actually, grown in the fields in the rural area, so close to us. And only about 2 hours away, I would go to my grandmother's place, which I enjoyed very much. Many cousins, and we would play and we would do all the things that happen in a rural setting. And so for 2 months of every year, I would be in that life. And I'm so grateful for that, because I think some of my fond memories of Rwanda are certainly in the north of Rwanda, very close to the volcanoes. In fact, one of my aunties lived at the foot of one of the volcanoes, so we used to go there. I've never been to see the gorillas, because when you live so close to them, it's for other people, it's for tourists. You actually don't get that thought. But I was too young, but I really enjoyed the time. I miss the greenery, I have to say.
Hello, everyone. If you're interested in advertising on WorldView, drop us an email at worldview.help@gmail.com. We will send you an advertisement guide, which will include the rates and the process involved. A typical shout out for your company or project will be between 45 and 60 seconds. By advertising on our platform, you'll be supporting a company that wants to improve the public narrative. Once again, send us an email at worldview.help@gmail.com, which you can also find in the description below. Now, back to the interview. And for a small country, there's a lot of people in Rwanda. I think the population is about 12 million people living in Rwanda.
Yeah, and just before that, when in the early 90s, they were saying that it was about 8 million, and that's still a lot. At the time, it was the most densely populated country in Africa. I think it still is. Rwanda is still the most densely populated country. But I was reading a book, somebody wrote about one and said, what if Rwanda was not as small as what people say? You know, because it's hilly. There's a lot of mountains and a lot of hills, and people live actually on the slopes of those hills, and that's where they do their agricultural activities. And his argument was, if you were to like a squashed paper, if you were to extend the surface of Rwanda, it's actually much bigger than it looks on the map, right? So I thought, that's an interesting argument, right? So that densely populated kind of experience is now much more apparent because Kigali is sprawling, outside, and now there is a lot more neighborhoods than were there before, and you can certainly sense that people are getting more out and out of the cities, growing very fast. Yeah, the cities, let me say the cities, because even where my grandmother was, it was one compound, and then the next house was a bit far away, and then another one was far away. Now they are all densely together, densely built together. So it's changing.
And I mean, like I told you before we started this interview, I've been to Rwanda with my dad, and the amazing place, the amazing thing about Rwanda, the land of 1,000 hills, is it's almost always you have a beautiful view, especially at night, because you look over the other hills with all those shining lights from all the houses. It's amazing.
Yes, always. But the most, I can tell you the most beautiful view. There are people who wake up in the morning and they have mist beneath them every day, and it looks like clouds. And so there are people in Rwanda who always wake up on top of clouds, and it's. I once, I think I wrote that in the book as well. I once was in a short trip with my uncle very early in the morning, and we were in Kigali, and it was one of the biggest traffic circles in Kigali. And just beneath us, where it was mist, but it was so dense that it looked like clouds. And when he saw that, he was like, oh my God, this reminds me of my time flying between Rwanda and Germany and going to study. And I just feel like I'm on a plane right now. Now, he said that. I had never been on a plane then. I thought, wow, this is what it looks like to be on a plane. I certainly want to, And so that's like the kind of experiences you get. And I certainly dream of one day having a little house where I wake up in the morning and the mist is so dense, it looks like clouds beneath me. And that experience you can have in Rwanda,
Yeah, it's an incredible country. But Pie-Pacifique, how many languages do they speak in Rwanda? And for example, I know one of them is French. What is the story behind that? Why do some speak French in Rwanda?
So Rwanda was actually a Belgian colony. And so the Belgium, of course, came with French. Well, if we track a little back, it originally was a German colony, but the Germans didn't last long. after the World War, they were defeated, and then Rwanda was handed over to Belgium. And so that's where French comes from. So there was no English in Rwanda until, of course, 1994, when the RPF took over the power.
Sorry, Pie-Pacifique, can you move closer to the microphone again so that we can clearly hear your voice? Thank you very much.
Okay, right. So the indigenous language is just one. It's Kinyarwanda. They are different. In different regions, they have a different tone to the language and influences from neighboring countries' languages. But inside Rwanda, despite the different tones, it's only one language. It's called Kinyarwanda. And then there's the French because of the Belgian history. And then there's English because the new administration, as you would know, the RPF that invaded Rwanda in 1990, they came from Uganda mostly. And so that's where the English influence came from. So the ruling party is predominantly Anglophone. And so they introduced English there. So Rwanda is now Anglophone and Francophone at the same time, one of the few countries that belong to the Commonwealth and to the Organization of Francophonie in the world. So it's a blessing, I think. But also, if you look at geographically, Burundi is Francophone and the DRC is Francophone. That's South and West. And then you have the North, Uganda is English, and Tanzania is also in English, which is in the East. So Rwanda is right in the middle of those four countries. Two of them are Francophone and two of them are Anglophone. So it actually makes sense that it be bilingual, so to speak. And then you add the indigenous languages. And there's a little bit of Swahili, of course, because of the proximity to Tanzania and Congo.
And it's because the Belgians, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's because the Belgians colonized Rwanda for that period that the distinction between Hutu and Tutsi became very important.
In so many ways, they are the ones who officialized it and made it, I suppose I would say, a compulsory attribute in people's identity cards. But Hutus and Tutsis and Twas, you know, when I was growing up, we had these tales from history, you know, people who tell in Rwandan folklore, right? They talk about Hutus and Tutsis and Twas. And there are three ethnic groups that coexist, that live together in harmony. And there are many, many, many tales about that. But it had never been a point of separation until the colonization and the politicization of these ethnic distinctions started in the first half of the last century. And then, of course, it culminated in what happened in 1994. Yeah.
And what are some of the distinctions between a Hutu and a Tutsi? I think one is taller than the other.
Look, if you ask the Belgians who wrote those books, you know, there are even tapes of them measuring people's noses and all of that. But let me tell you the truth. Although they say Tutsis are taller and they have a much sharper nose, and Hutus are therefore shorter and they are bulkier, etc. My belief, this is my personal belief, I don't think there is any person in Rwanda who can claim to be exclusively Tutsi or exclusively Hutu, especially because of where it is claimed these two ethnic groups came from. Because they say that the Tutsis came from Ethiopia and Somalia, and so they were nomadic people, you know, herding cows, and then the Hutus came from, I don't know, Chad and more Central Africa, and then came. They were land farmers, and so they found another indigenous group there, Twas, which has always been the minority, but then they the three formed this nation called Rwanda. But when you look at the people, I mean, I have been told that I'm too tall to be a Hutu, but my nose is too flat to be a Tutsi. And that my limbs are definitely not Hutu limbs, especially my fingers. And then, and I can tell you that I was once sat down at the roadblock because of some of my attributes thought to be of a Tutsi. So, although they would say, Tutsis are taller and Hutus are shorter, there are very tall Hutus and who were actually killed in the genocide because they were said to be Tutsis. And there are Tutsis who survived because their height disguised them. So there is I think, as much as in the literature or during colonization, they made it so extreme, like Tutsis are like that and Hutus are like that. In the current Rwanda, I really wouldn't say that.
That's interesting. And I mean, your family were Hutus, but still you came into trouble because I believe it was your father that supported a colonel who backed the rebels. So what's the story there?
Yeah, so my father was, I think in 75 when he became the burgomaster of a district, and he was very close to.
Is that the equivalent of a mayor?
Yeah, the equivalent of a mayor, yeah. And so he was a friend of the Minister of the Interior then, who was a Colonel Kanyarengwe, who was actually quite influential because he was one of the officers who had just successfully toppled the government in 73. Right? So he was a very powerful figure. But then in 80, he was suspected of plotting a coup d'etat against his comrade, the president. And so he fled the country, but many people were not as fortunate. So my father was one of them. He got arrested. He was acquitted for the first time, and then he was out. And then he got arrested again, this time without charge or trial or anything, but his case was before what they called the State Security Court. So it was all state security matters, I would say. And so this writing of the book actually helped me to kind of understand my father more because I had to research on him. And one of the things I came across was an Amnesty International report talking about his imprisonment in 1985. This is a 1985 report. And so eventually he was released in 1986, and then he died in 1989. But because of that political profile and his association with the Colonel Kanyarengwe, who then was the chairman of the RPF, the invading rebellion that was actually attacking Rwanda, by association, we were traitors. And so those who knew us immediately assumed that we were RPF. And so, and this is, by the way, was the case with other people who were not necessarily Tutsi, but who either disagreed or sympathized with the RPF or the Tutsis, or did not want that kind of oppression or separation, and they were labeled traitors. And so what happened then is, by association, my family was among those who had to die during the genocide, and they came for us. It's a night that I wrote about it in the book, but I can talk about it for a long time. And fortunately, my mother survived, I survived, but they killed people at home. They threw a grenade in the house. They did other unspeakable things in the house, yeah, 2 lives were lost, and one, the policeman particularly, died protecting us. And so, yeah, so it was completely by association that we found ourselves on this, on the wrong side of the fence, so to speak. But there are many, many other people who lost their lives in a similar manner in that way.
What is the story behind cut the tall trees? Where did that quote come from? Why was it used?
Honestly, I don't know where it came from, but the whole thing of believing that Tutsis, because they are so tall, then they had to be cut down. And there is actually the most famous one was somebody who said that they had to be cut down and thrown in the river, because one of the rivers in Rwanda ends up in the Nile. Yeah, one of the rivers ends up in the Lake Victoria and then ends up in the Nile, and said they must be sent back where they came from. And so making reference to, Ethiopia and that part of the Nile. There were many, many references that it's not just cut down the tall trees, it's must crush the cockroaches. Cockroaches. And there were many ways that they referred to people to dehumanize them. In so many ways, I suspect that some of the people who ended up killing really believed that they were dealing with less than humans, because that's what happens when you have these kind of rhetorics.
And okay, so your book's name is Witnessing. Per your book, what did you witness? If I may ask, what I believe one of the scenes that you witnessed was in front of a church where a few people were in the first days they were slaughtered.
Yeah, what I witnessed was a lot of. I mean, I was 13. If you can think about a 13-year-old boy. So I used to go do errands because we still had to survive, and I still had to go and buy vegetables and little food that we could, and my mother couldn't. She couldn't go. And on some of those trips, and then I was working to earn some bread in some makeshift bar. And so on my going there and back, I saw a lot of things. And I saw one of the scenes I saw, of course, is the one you're referring to, where men were taken from a church. And they were hiding in there, and they threw in what you call it, tear gas in the church. And so they came out. And then they were killed with traditional weapons, and machetes. And now, watching that, I think that's probably one of the scenes that had me take a long time before I was courageous enough to write about it, because I didn't know if I was going to find the words to talk about the tear gas smell, because I also smelled it. They watching these men sing before they were killed. They actually sang church hymns before they were killed, and hearing these other people sharpening their machetes on the tarmac that we're going to use to kill them, and then watching. There's this. We had one of the neighbors. Her brother was one of the people who was killing the people, and she was shivering and in tears. And at some point, she called him to ask him to go and kill one of the men who had not been killed fully. He had been severely injured. He was sitting on top of the pile of dead bodies, but he was alive, and she thought he was suffering. And so she was asking him to go in and end his suffering. And so for a long time, I thought, I witnessed somebody saying, please go kill him out of compassion. And so there is that particular day, I think was one of the days that I thought, there's no way I can find the words to write about that. But it was actually after I let go of the need to be right and precise and be correct in what I'm describing, and say it in a certain way. When I let go of that need to do that, just write what I remember, it was much easier.
But Pie-Pacifique, many people wonder, how is this possible, right? How is it possible that people, individuals, that one day they're smiling at you, they're laying the bricks on a wall, and the next day they have a panga in their hand and they're chopping a person's head off? How does this happen? What is it? Something within us? Is it propaganda? How did this happen?
It's all of the above. It's all of the above. Now, I know that many people don't like to hear this, but I think we all have it in us. Given the wrong circumstances or the right circumstances for the right amount of time, I think we can be pushed to a point where we do that. Remember that there was a war that started in 1990, but the whole Hutu Tutsi rhetoric didn't start then. It had been there before. And in fact, there had been other events before 1990 which were polarizing. In fact, the RPF was formed by refugees, Tutsi refugees who are descendants, or actually they were children when they fled in 1959 and 1960 when there were uprisings against the kingdom at the time. So this Hutu Tutsi thing was not new. It didn't come out of nowhere. But in the 4 years since 1990, there were just this melting pot of polarizing statements, polarizing events, polarizing political parties. They actually, because Rwanda was a single party until a certain point, and in the early 90s, they opened up the space for a multi-party system. And some of those parties then had youth wings, and of course, to excite the members, they had a lot of things that they said about Hutus and about Tutsis, and then on the other side, you have a rebellion that is actually attacking the country. So the army is at war with the rebellion, and we're receiving reports of what is happening where the rebels have conquered, of mass massacres. Some of them were true and some of them were not true, were just to inflame the situation. Right? And so you have then politicians who say, you see what they are doing where they have captured, you see the many Hutus that they have killed, this is what they are going to do when they get to you. And so you need to defend yourself. And so, and by the way, it's not just these RPF, it's your neighbors. They are the ones that are the cause of all of this. So you have this this fear-mongering, I want to say, that happens over time. And then at some point, whether it was the trigger or not, then when the president was killed in a shooting, they shot the plane down. When the plane was shot down, what people said is, what more proof do you need that these people are actually out to get your blood? And so it served as proof that they are indeed bad. And so I don't know if I can explain how that happens, but I can tell you, on the 6th of April, 1994, we were still in a country that had a lot of hope. There was the Arusha Accords had been signed. The government, transition government that included the rebels and the government was, in the process of being put in place. There was no war in the country at the time. There was hope of peace and everything. There was what you call them, international forces, it's called UNAMIR or MINUAR, the United Nations soldiers were in Rwanda to oversee the implementation of the Arusha Accords. So I think an average Rwandan an ordinary neighborhood thought, okay, the war is behind us now. And so suddenly there is this event. I can tell you, I travel quite a lot on the continent, and one of the conversations I had was with a Frenchman I met in Cote d'Ivoire. And he told me he was working in Rwanda at the time. And he offered his colleague an opportunity to leave the country. The colleague was a Tutsi, and his family to go in a branch of that organization that is in Tanzania so they can go. And his response was, if this was like, I don't know, a few weeks ago, I would go. But now, you see, the United Nations is here, the accords are here, they've been signed, it is peaceful, and I like what I'm doing here, so no. And so himself, this Frenchman was saying, also, of course, if the Europeans and then the United Nations and everybody is here, nothing is really going to happen. And when the plane was shot, it happened. In fact, 10 of the Belgian soldiers were killed. The day that it all started, 10 of the Belgian soldiers were killed. And so what he was telling me was, I hate the superpowers, he said, and I hate the United Nations because they gave false hope to my friend, and he and his family perished. So unfortunately, him and his family, his friend's family, they all died days after he had offered to get them out of the country. So that's like, for me, that story told me that people were hopeful. And I was in boarding school, I have to tell you. I was in boarding school in the south of Rwanda. I had gone home because we were on Easter holiday. I was planning to go back to school. It all happened the weekend after the Easter weekend. It was an ordinary country, no more war, no more, and then suddenly, boom, it all happened.
Yeah, it seems like almost everyone was caught by surprise by this. I mean, whether you read your book or you watch a movie like Hotel Rwanda, almost everyone believed everything was looking up. But I think one forgets it only takes like 10% or less of a population that can cause all this trouble, like an organization like the Interamwe that was just waiting for this to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in any you just need that, whatever they call it, trigger and then it's very easy to reach a tipping point. But it had all been simmering for a long time. Was it avoidable? I think so. I really think so. I think it was avoidable.
Do you think the Americans or the Europeans could have stopped this?
Well, I think Rwandans could have stopped it, but as far as the powers of the time, the Americans and the French and everybody, I think they could have limited the extent. I think they could have intervened and limited it, certainly, because there was a certain, let's sit and wait and see what's going to happen. In fact, the French and the Americans were fighting in the Security Council over who goes and who doesn't. So the French were like, we need to go now, and the Americans were like, no, we're not going. And so eventually the French got only permission to create a buffer zone in Rwanda, in the western part of Rwanda, but not to actually have a bigger intervention. But it all happened too late. And so then for a whole 3 months, nothing happened. But, also the warring parties, I think the current president also is on record for saying that anybody who is going to come to Rwanda as a foreign force is going to be considered an enemy. He didn't want an intervention. So so could it have been avoided? I think so. Could it have been limited? Certainly, it could have been limited. but we are now sitting with that history, unfortunately.
Yeah, very unfortunately. Pie-Pacifique, what is your opinion of the current president, Paul Kagame? Do you think he is doing the right thing for Rwanda?
You know, he's a politician, so and there will always be those who say he's doing right and those who say he is not. Right? So there's this economic trajectory that Rwanda is on that I really like, and I can see things happening. I have family who, to a great extent, benefit from some of the programs that are happening there. I think like anybody else in the world, like the book I wrote, I don't think I can write such a book in Rwanda. So it's this conversation is not a conversation we can have in Rwanda. Now, for me, I think it's a tragedy that we can't have such a conversation, because if there is anything that would contribute to people healing, it's actually to talk about this. Unfortunately, that space is closed completely. Right? So that part, I don't think I like it. Does it have to be either or? I don't know. In fact, I think it doesn't have to. I wrote in the book that I'm one of the people who don't think that you have to shut down the space for conversation in order to have development. I don't agree with that. I don't think that you have to do that. It doesn't have to be either or. And unfortunately, in Rwanda right now, it's either or. That's if you can sum up the policy, it's either or. And so that part, I don't agree. But of course, as a politician, and he would also know himself that you can't please everybody. There's no politician who pleases everybody. And so he does what he thinks is best, I think.
I think that's unfortunately the consequence of being a military leader and becoming a president of a country. The civil rights issues always arise. But Pie-Pacifique, I mean, you're currently in South Africa. How did you make that journey from Rwanda to South Africa, and why?
Yeah, so as you said, politically, there is a thought that just came to me. I want to recommend a book that I think could help. It's called Do Not Disturb. If you get your hands on the book by Michael Wrong, I think you will. For me, when I read it, it gave me an insight more into the man, Kagame, the man, not the president, the man. So it actually really had me open more of my heart with compassion for him. So just as a note. Well, I left Rwanda 7 years after the genocide. It was in 2001. It was unfortunately not long after my brother was killed. He was killed in a village massacre in the north of Rwanda. And then my uncle was kidnapped, and we fortunately found him a couple of years later. And then my mother was also held in a cell for about 5 months. And so when she came out, she was like, you need to go. You need to go. So when I resisted that, she said, do you want me to lose you the same way I lost your brother? Your brother that you can't even bury. Because, I mean, we knew where the mass graves were, but we were not allowed to even say that he was killed. And so, and then it very, very clearly became a family concern. And so when I left, my intentions were to hopefully go to the West, like most migrants would be hoping to go to the West and mind you, now those who end up in the UK are going to be sent back to Rwanda. So I left hoping to go to the West. And when I got to Tanzania, my hope was that I was going to go to Canada. Unfortunately, it was a scam. So all the money that I had was taken, and then I had a little bit left. And with that, I decided to go to the nearest Francophone country I could think of. And so I was 20. And so looking at the map, I was thinking Madagascar. Okay. So if I go to Mozambique, I can go to Madagascar. Of course, it doesn't happen that way. You don't find a way to go to Madagascar from Mozambique that easily. And so I couldn't. And I ended up in Maputo, where I had a choice to go to a refugee camp or go to South Africa. And I chose the latter. But even when I came here, I had decided that it was temporary. I was going to work hard enough so that I can make enough money so I can I can go to Europe and America. So then I decided to stay. I decided to stay, especially when I realized that universities here are on par with the best universities in the world. So I decided to pursue my academic career here. But I got opportunities to go to Europe and to America and to many of the places I wanted to go to, and I still chose to come back to South Africa.
And you spoke in your book that you were concerned about anti-foreigner sentiments in South Africa. Did you find that to be true, that there's some sort of xenophobia in South Africa?
Yes, but not to the extent that I feared. In fact, I think it was more because the way it was told to me, number one, there was this misconception that all Black people in South Africa are Zulus, right? But that's because Zulu is a very popular word. You know, I think next to Mandela, it's one of the most popular words out of South Africa is Zulu. And so, and unfortunately, many of the stories that were told were stories of violence and anti-Black African who are not South African. The sentiment, the negative sentiment. And so I didn't want to come here for that, but I had two other reasons. And one was the racism from white people. Now, it was when you are outside of South Africa, there's this thing that, so in South Africa, there are Black people, then there's white people, racists. So because of apartheid, so all of that. But I also came at the time when there was a scandal in the media about white South African policemen who were unleashing dogs onto illegal immigrants in the veldt, and they were caught on camera, and there was a big court case at the time. And so I was thinking, the first thing I will become is an illegal immigrant, and I certainly don't want to be caught by white policemen. So that was the second reason, is the racism. And then I couldn't speak English. I was educated in French. I could speak French, but not English. And so I was thinking, there is no way I can make a life in a non-Francophone country. And so for all those reasons, I had decided that South Africa was a no-go. I came because I had no choice.
But I mean, today you run your own consultancy firm, but back then in South Africa, you were a car guard. I mean, that's how you started. I'm always curious, what is the life of a car guard like? I mean, do you make most of your money through tips, or is it from the local venue? Do they supply you with most of the money?
Some of the venues paid. I remember on 9/11, when the 9/11 happened, I was a gate watchman at the Jewish Center in Durban, and I was watching their back gate. They paid, because it wasn't about watching cars, it was about watching the gate. So 9/11, I was a day watchman for that gate at the Durban Jewish Center. But if you were a car guard in the streets, depending on the tips for motorists, you actually paid somebody to get that jacket. So there was this organization that we used to pay. We would go to the office, we paid, they gave us a jacket, and then we go and stand in the street, and in the evening, we took the jacket back. So at the time when I was a car guard, we were paying 7 rand. But I know places where they paid 30 rand. Like car guards who were watching cars at the Pavilion Center, the shopping center, they paid. And I know because my roommate, my flatmate was a car guard at the Pavilion. And they paid for their own uniform. And then after the 30 rand, whatever they make is theirs. But the life of a car guard is simple in that you wake up in the morning, you get your jacket, and then you go to stand in your spot. But it's a territorial business. So if you don't go there, someone else will go there. And so I realized that very early on, that if I keep going there in one place, this is it. This is going to be my life for a long time. So I decided to be the one without a place who looks after other people's places when they have something to do. I was the floating car guard. What that gave me was the freedom to work when I wanted to. And then it gave me a lot of time to deal with home affairs for my papers, and then deal with the University of Natal for my admission. But I have to say that I know people who were car guards then who are still car guards today. It's a sad thing to say, but many people didn't manage to snap out of it. But there are also other people who did snap out of it. My roommate decided to re-enroll for matric. He wrote matric while I was doing my first year. I had told him that the university has a new policy now. You can apply for financial aid. I remember when I told him, he said, "I will kill you." And he enrolled. He enrolled in nursing, his first year of nursing, and then he applied for medical school, and he's now a doctor. Right? So there are many stories like that in South Africa. But I can say my time as a car guard, the best time I had was when I was watching cars outside of the university. And people didn't manage to get parking inside. They would park outside and they would pay me to watch their cars. But I was more interested in conversations with students because I was curious, what happens in there? You know, how do you get in there? I was just curious. And those who gave me the gift of conversation were actually, I was happier than those who gave me Turek. And I will never forget having this feeling of, I want to be the one swiping that card and making that gate, turn, because it was like the dream for me to become one of these students for whom I watch cars.
And you achieved that dream. But Pie-Pacifique, I see we're running out of time. I want to ask you 2 last questions, if that's okay with you. One is, do you miss Rwanda? Do you think it was the right choice to leave Rwanda and come to South Africa?
Choice, yes. It was, looking at how my life has evolved, I wouldn't have it any differently. Was it the right choice for me, for family? Yes, it was the right choice. Do I miss Rwanda? Absolutely, I do. I miss Rwanda, and I hope one day to go back and stand in some of those places I write about and just say it is as it is.
So you haven't been back at all?
No.
Wow.
No, because of course of my refugee status, but also, I mean, as I told you, there like writing this book is not something I would do in Rwanda. There's absolutely nothing, I'm not insulting the government or doing anything wrong, but it's not a conversation that takes place in Rwanda. Right? So me having a conversation like this is unlikely in Rwanda. And it's simple things like that that actually make it difficult for people in people's evolution in some aspects of life. But am I going to go back to Rwanda? Certainly, I will, and I look forward to that very much.
This might be an unorthodox question to end off on, but what advice would you give someone that went through the same circumstances that you went through, or are scared of going through the same thing you went through? What advice would you give a person like that?
Advice. I think if you go through what I went through, the best advice is whenever you have an opportunity to share about it, do that. If I can tell you, if there is the greatest gift I have received is from people who took time to listen to me as I shared about my experiences, because that's actually what liberated me. And I realized, I can tell you, it's like night and day. When I was bottling it in because I was afraid of how I was going to be perceived if I say I lived through all of these things. At some point I thought it's not a story worth telling. And how, after I shared, I eventually realized that actually in it all, if I am courageous enough to observe carefully, which is, by the way, why I call the book Witnessing, because myself, I was witnessing the things that I have lived through, which I had repressed for a long time. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to open myself to it now. And I'm so grateful I had an opportunity to do that. And it's now what makes me the human being that I am. And anybody who lives through these things, I hope, at least once in their life, they're going to have this non-judgmental space where they can share about their experiences. Because it's not just my story. When I share, I think it also becomes our story. And that's what I'm saying is it's shared. This too is part of our human experience. And so I would say, I wish you an opportunity to share what you have lived through for our humanity.
Yeah, that's such a great message to end off on. Thank you, Pie-Pacifique, for your time. It's been so great. And I think many people are grateful that you wrote that book, because it's such an incredible story that they feel they're part of. But thank you so much to our viewers. You most certainly enjoyed this content if you've made it this far. So please show your appreciation by liking this video, sharing it as widely as possible, and subscribing to our channel. My name is Donald, and you've been watching WorldView.
Thank you, Donald.